Shalom. I'm Yoel Finkelman, curator of the Judaica collection at the National Library of Israel.
I'm Nechama Goldman Barish, a senior faculty member at the Pardes Institute of Jewish Studies in Jerusalem.
And today we're going to be introducing elements of the Jewish calendar, and we will be doing so by using items and ancient manuscripts from the rare book collection at the National Library of Israel. This is a perfect example of the medieval Spanish Jewish scribal tradition. It is a complete Bible from the year 1260 with beautiful carpet pages and tremendous attention to detail. We're going to begin with a verse from early in Exodus, a verse that is absolutely critical, perhaps the most important verse in the Bible for the establishment of the later Hebrew calendar. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe v'el Aharon be'eretz Mitzrayim lemor. HaChodesh hazeh lachem rosh chodashim, rishon hu lachem lachodshei hashana.
So I'm going to bring the translation, but first let me say that I'm so moved by seeing a Bible that's so many hundreds of years old. I teach Jewish text, but to see early versions of the text is really deeply moving. The translation of the verse you just read, which you said is very central to the calendar, this month shall mark for you the beginning of the month. It shall be the first of the months of the year for you.
Traditionally, the rabbis understood this as a commandment to set a calendar. And it's important to realize that a calendar is almost the thing that fixes a community's identity. It helps make it who it is. This set of sacred and profane time that helps determine when holidays exist, when communities come together, how families and communities manage their sense of self and their sense of time.
Well, what kind of calendar? What was the ancient calendar based upon?
Well, we see from this verse that the core elements of the Jewish calendar begin with the lunar month, and that the new moon, the cycles of the moon, are central to determining when a month begins and when a month ends, and thereby when various holidays occur or do not occur.
So that really works well with ancient biblical interpretation, which focuses on lachem, or for you, which we know determines that witnesses will come and declare the new moon, and really turning them into partners in creating the sacred time you just described. So the lunar calendar demands, according to interpretation, a declaration of the sighting of the new moon. And this is really in contrast to the Jewish Sabbath, which is automatically every 7 days, regardless of what cycle we're in the year. The Jewish calendar is determined by the lunar calendar and the movement of the moon.
And the human participation.
And the partnership, which is so beautiful. Yeah.
Nechama, can you say more about this partnership that you described in the Jewish tradition between God and the people in establishing the calendar?
Of course, I'd be happy to. The biblical text only tells us that the new moon must be declared. The definition of what that looks like, how to carry that out, what it means for witnesses to come, comes from early rabbinic interpretation in a text known as the Mishnah, or commonly referred to as the oral Torah or the oral law. It was a kind of legal code spanning hundreds of topics, including thousands of laws that were written by Jewish sages some 2,000 years ago.
So maybe we should take a look at some of that. We're looking now at a marvelous printed book, one of the first Hebrew printed books ever printed. This is 1492 in Napoli in Spain. The famous Sansino family, perhaps among the most famous of the early Hebrew printers in the earliest years of the development of the technology of Hebrew printing. And they printed this, the second ever printed edition of the Mishnah. And we are in the Mishnah, Masechet Rosh Hashanah, the tractate that deals with the establishment of the new moon. And the Mishnah describes checking witnesses who arrive at the court to declare that they've seen the new moon and to declare that the new month has begun.
So I'd like to read that Mishnah. Ketzad bodkim et ha'edim, zug sheba rishon bodkin oto rishon, machnisim et hagadol shebehem, va'omrim lo emur, ketzad ra'ita et levana lifnei hachama o la'achar hachama, litzfona o ledroma, kama haya gavoa, v'la'ayin haya noteh, v'kama haya rachav, Im amar lifnei hachama Lo amar klum. And I'll translate and then explain a little bit. They bring them in, they bring in the pair of witnesses. The first one they examine first, and they begin to ask the greater of the two, how did you see the new moon? Did you see it before the sun or behind the sun, to its north or to its south? How high was it in the sky? And really that gives you a sense of the kind of detail they put into the examination. And of course, if the testimony does not add up, then the witnesses are dismissed as being inaccurate or false witnesses.
And in fact, we have another Mishnah later on that describes in more detail how the witnesses were led to their testimony. Dmut surat lefanot hayu lo leRabban Gamliel be'aliyato betavla uvekotel shebahem. Mar'eh et hahedyotot ve'omer, hakazeh ra'ita o kazeh.
And what we have here is Rabban Gamliel, one of the master sages in the Mishnaic period, around the 1st century CE. He would actually have forms of the moon hung on a tablet on the wall of his attic, which he would show to the laymen. And he would ask them, did you see like this? Or did you see like this? So he wasn't only relying on their oral testimony, he actually gave them visual presentations, visual diagrams, which they could point to kind of solidify and anchor their oral testimony.
In the end of the day then, witnesses who came and described that they'd seen the new moon would be examined, and if they were found to be speaking truthfully, then the court would declare mekudash mekudash, that the new moon had been founded, which required extra sacrifices in the time of the temple, and also had implications for when the various holidays would be. And until the court established the moon, the people didn't necessarily know what day the holiday would be.
And it came along with great celebration. If you read this chapter of Mishnah, the people really turn out almost like a parade as they watch the witnesses going up to Jerusalem, giving them food and drink and so on. And so, it really becomes a partnership not only between the witnesses and the court, it also, the nation is waiting with bated breath. When is the new moon going to be declared so that they know when their holidays are going to be commemorated? We have seen the evolution from a biblical command to mark the month, translated into a human initiative that engages and connects the people with the Jewish calendar, turning them into partners through an intricate cross-examination of the witnesses. However, there was a problem with only relying on the lunar calendar. Since the lunar calendar is shorter than the solar calendar, the holidays would end up drifting around the seasons of the year. It was very important to the sages that Passover always fall in the spring. And so they began a series of intercalation, essentially adding a leap year, adding a month to the year in order to make Passover always fall in the spring. And that really was a shift towards the lunisolar calendar that we end up having as our Jewish calendar.
Now, another development is from the ancient rabbinic period, from the Second Temple period until the medieval period, is the development of a fixed calendar. Instead of relying on witnesses, instead of relying on the weather and the cloud cover to determine whether today is the first of the month, the rabbis gradually shifted toward a calendar that could be determined from the outset on the basis of astronomical calculations.
Okay, well, what do you have to show me that looks like that?
Well, this is a really super exciting item. It's one of the oldest items in the National Library of Israel's collection. It's from the famed Cairo Geniza. The Cairo Geniza was a collection of some 300,000 or 400,000 pages, the largest collection of medieval documents ever found, which was held in the Karaite synagogue in Fustat, the ancient city, the old city of Cairo. And it was brought to the West at the end of the 19th century in various bits and pieces.
And if I'm not mistaken, it didn't only include Jewish religious texts, it had really wonderful pieces of information about Jewish life.
It has letters, it has children's learning to read and write, it has religious texts, it has shopping lists, it has recipes, it has medical advice, anything you could possibly imagine in the Cairo Geniza. And here's one example of a piece of Browning paper from, get this, the year 1131. And this is a very simple fixed calendar. It tells you which days of the week the holidays or the new moon, the beginning of the month, were going to be during the year 1131, 1132. And we can see here the word Mar Cheshvan, the month of Cheshvan, Kislev, Pesach, the holiday of Passover. And each of these holidays and months is described as falling on a certain day as part of an increasingly fixed calendar.
From this point on, Jews are constantly and intensively calculating their calendars using math, astronomy, and astrology in order to know when the holidays are going to fall out on any given year. And even today, when you get your new calendar, one of the first things many people do is flip to see when the Jewish holidays are going to fall. For instance, when is Passover in the spring?
So let's take a look at a particularly, I would even say, cute document from the 18th century. There's a developing tradition in the 18th century of the revival of Jewish manuscript art, especially in Central Europe. And this is an example of a book called Sefer Evronot, a book which describes the astronomical and the mathematics that are necessary for calculating the fixed calendar. So we see here a marvelous chart that describes the tkufot, the fixed times of the year in the various different months, with cute, almost folk drawings typical of the period.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful watercolors. The color of the trees and the fruit and the flowers are quite striking.
And then here, kind of mechanical paper wheels that help you calculate which day is going to fall out in which year on the basis of rotating the different paper wheels called volvels. And this is just a marvelous document, typical of the kind of folk art that came with some of the 18th century Hebrew manuscripts and could be used as a guide for a scholar determining how the fixed calendar would come out during these years.
We can't even appreciate it because, of course, today we get our calendar and all the work is done for us.
Yeah, all the work is done for us, and that leads us to one of my favorite items, which we can take a look at. This is one of the first examples of Hebrew print in the New World, and it's just the almanac, the annual almanac of 1798 from Kingston, Jamaica. And the almanac from Kingston, Jamaica in 1798 includes the Hebrew calendar. The Jewish merchant community in Jamaica was important enough that the merchant population and the agricultural population of Jamaica needed to know when the Jewish calendar and the Jewish holidays would fall out.
You also have the Gregorian months right alongside it. So if Shvat, the Rosh Chodesh of the month of Shvat, the new moon, it's on January 13th. So I can see when the Hebrew date is and how it corresponds to the English date. That's really quite amazing. What I love is to see that there are Jews all over the world producing calendars for their community with distinct signs and symbols from their immediate world. And that's going to continue into our own era. And so what we've seen is how important determining sacred time is as it evolves from the biblical period to the rabbinic period to the modern period through the establishment of a fixed calendar. Because really through our holidays, through our sacred occasions, we in fact establish an identity of what our relationship looks like within our communities, but also outwardly in relationship to the world and to God.
Nechama, it's been great talking to you about the Jewish calendar, and thanks for listening and watching.